I want to recognize someone who from the MCC who is kind enough to be with us. Mary Jenkins is here. Thank you for coming, Mary. I want to thank MassArt and the president, Kurt Steinberg, and I'd also like to thank the Vice President of Advancement, Marjorie O'Malley, who when I came to her with this idea said, yes, why not, sure, and was very helpful. And I'd also like to thank Peg Tuitt, who is an events coordinator, to help us with all the bells and whistles and the lovely refreshments for the event. So I want to thank you all, and this is really a great room to host the event, and since many of the pieces we'll be looking at tonight happened right in your front yard in Evansway Park, I think it's the appropriate place for the Public by Design panel. I'm going to be introducing panelists, and I will be introducing and then showing some work of some of the panelists, some of the artists and architects who are on our panel. And after that, we're going to go into a more general discussion. And after that, I'd welcome your questions, comments, any responses that you might have. So we're going to have a formal presentation, but then we'd like it to be a little bit more casual. So the first person I'm going to introduce tonight is Matthew Hickman. He is an associate professor at the Massachusetts College of Art and Design, and he currently serves as the interim dean of academic administration. He teaches in the Fine Arts 3D department with sculpture concentration and is interested in holistic approaches to making and educating the acquisition of critical thinking skills through manual labor and the making of objects. Jamaica Pond Beach and Still 24 bench. I'm sorry, Jamaica Pond Bench. There's a difference between a beach and a bench. And Still 2014 are two of his public art projects currently installed in Jamaica Plain. He also created two sculptural fence projects for elementary schools within the BPS system, the Haley School in Roslindale and the Mendel School in Roxbury. And we're so happy to have someone from MassArt as an institution here on the panel tonight. Our second panelist is George Thrush. Many of you may know George. He is the director of the School of Architecture at Northeastern University. His research, practice, writing, and teaching all revolve around contemporary urban issues in architecture. The school he heads focuses on design solutions for Boston's post-industrial landscape of former transportation infrastructure and other difficult sites. He is among the primary authors of a comprehensive regional transportation and development proposal for the Boston metropolitan area called the New Urban Ring. His articles include Ring City, Civic Liberalism and Urban Design, and Boston's New Urban Ring, an antidote to fragmentation. George has written extensively in the popular press on matters of architecture and urban design. He has served on many public review panels and in 2011 hosted an academic conference entitled The Process, Public Participation in Design in Contested Cities since the 1960s. He was one of 3 recipients nationwide of the 1996 AIA Young Architect Citation. He received his bachelor's in architecture from the University of Texas in 1984 and his master's in architecture from Harvard University in 1988. In 2005, his work was celebrated with his entry into the American Institute of Architect College of Fellows. He currently discusses contemporary design and development issues in Boston in his blog for Boston Magazine. And you can look up that at Boston Magazine in their blog section. Thank you so much, George. And I actually had to condense his list of credentials and accomplishments, so it's quite extensive. Our third panelist is Janet Oberto. She is a champion for mission and brand with significant experience in higher education, the not-for-profit sector and mission-driven organizations. Janet works as a brand strategist and in client relations at Selber Perkins Design Collaborative, a multidisciplinary international design firm that has created some of the world's most notable brands and iconic landmarks. SPD's award-winning work for a diverse array of high-profile clients can be seen on 5 continents and combines branding, public art, sculpture, signage, and wayfinding to create meaningful environments that serve the public good. SPD has offices in Boston, Charleston, Los Angeles, Chicago, and Shanghai. Thank you, Janet, for joining us. Now I'm going to turn to our architects and designers, and I will introduce them, but then show some pieces of the work that they did for the Fenway Alliance, of which I'm the director, for our Public by Design initiative. Our first architect/artist designer is Kim Poliquin. Kim has played an instrumental role as design and technology integration leader on a range of project types. She has made significant contributions to the built world as a designer with a number of nationally recognized architecture practices, including Perkins & Will, Cambridge 7 Associates, and Vandenberg Architects. Kim is part of a new generation of emerging designers exploring a more interdisciplinary approach to design through temporary architecture and urban intervention. Through her organization, SHIFTboston, Kim works with community interest groups and government agencies to organize community-focused design-based strategies to fulfill public programming goals and civic visions. Kim has worked with the BRA on numerous initiatives to reactivate under-programmed communities in Boston, including the Fort Corn Channel, the waterfront area, Copley Square, and the Seaport District. In 2012, Kim designed and led the construction of one of Boston's largest environmental installations, ENfold Evans Way Park, commemorating the designation by the Massachusetts Cultural Council of the Fenway as Boston's first cultural district. Kim is the recipient of the 2012 Progressive Architecture Award from Architect Magazine and the 2012 Innovation Research Grant from Perkins & Will, and she just received the 2014 Unbuilt Architecture Award from the Boston Society of Architects. Her work has been featured in a number of leading design publications, including Architecture Record and The Architect's Newspaper, and regional and national sources such as the Boston Globe, CNN, and Scientific American. So thank you, Kim. What I'd like to do now is just show a few of the work that Kim has created for our initiative, Public by Design. So this is the planning. This was one of the planning design drawings that Kim made for this very complex piece that took up all of Evans Way Park that you see right outside the door here. Here's a night vision design drawing of the piece. I like to show the process of these pieces because for many of them it's so extensive and they're sort of beautiful works in and of themselves, I think. Here's the actual model that she designed. And here is the piece as it was programmed for Opening Our Doors. Opening Our Doors, as many of you know, is the Fenway Alliance's signature cultural event where we invite 14,000 people into the neighborhood for 65 indoor-outdoor artistic and cultural activities. And one of the great things about having these public artworks is that we get to program underneath, around, and sometimes on the piece itself. And this was a Brazilian drumming, Afro-Brazil, who did a drumming session around the piece. This is the piece at night, the shot of ENfold. This piece won a recognition from the Boston Society of Architects for the Unbuilt Design category, which was really fun for the Fenway Alliance to be part of that. This is what Kim did for the Fenway Alliance for our TEDx event last year. It's called Hydra. And this was put in the light well of the big landmark center, the New Samuels building, which used to be the old Sears building. And we were on the top floor, and she did this beautiful installation that people sat beneath for a TEDx Fenway grit. That's the piece as it was being constructed. These were Mylar cones, and Kim can talk a little bit more in detail about them, but you can see the construction and some of the material. It was very lightweight. And that's where you can see the people at the event actually sitting beneath the piece. It was a great addition to this TEDx talk. TEDx is about talking and performing, but to have something so stunning in a visual way was really special for us. And that's Kim with her design team.
The first one was a very challenging process, and it took a lot of patience and persistence to get it done. The first one was outdoors, so it involved a lot more permitting and the materials had to be far more rugged. We had to deal with weather. So we learned a lot from the process. I learned a lot from the process. And, it's a lot of fun. What the most exciting part about it is it brought a new energy. Both of those sort of brought about a new energy to a place. A new activity.
Yeah, we feel at the Fenway Alliance that these pieces are really about placemaking, and we'll talk more about that in our discussion, but that's really one of the major goals that we do the piece. It's for community building and placemaking, and we'll have more to say from the panelists as this goes on. I love this of the family. And you can see someone's pulling out one of the ribbons. And one of the things I like in this piece is someone had put the little heart strip. And that's just a beautiful shot of it in the daylight. So Rachel, is there anything you'd like to say about Interlace in the process before we get into the real panel discussion? You're going to say, okay, great. Our next panelist is Toni Gaspard. She is the Community Relations Liaison for the First Church of Christ Scientists, the world headquarters for the Christian Science Church. Toni coordinates the church's support for and participation in local charitable and civic causes and develops ongoing relationships with religious, community, and political leaders and groups. She spearheaded and served as the project manager and curator for Convergence, the 2013 sculpture exhibit by Boston Sculptures Gallery on the Christian Science Plaza. She is also the church's representative for its prison ministry. She holds a BS in International Business and a Juris Doctor. And our second to final panelist is Murray DeWart. Murray is an internationally recognized sculptor who has built large public and private sculptures across the United States during his 40-year career. In Sculptor magazine, he was named one of Boston's premier sculptors, and he has worked in more than 30 permanent collections, among them the Museum of Fine Arts Boston, the Boston Athenaeum, the De Cordova Sculpture Park and Museum, Harvard University, and the San Marco Museum in Peru. DeWart has built public sculptures for 2 cities in China, Beijing and Fuzhou, and one in the city of Ra'anana near Tel Aviv. He is the co-founder of Boston Sculptors Gallery. So this is the Convergence that was curated by Toni, and many artists, including Murray, contributed, and we're just going to show you some select work. There were about, I think, how many works were on the plaza? 30. 30. This was just the program book, which was a really nicely designed book for this public art installation. This is one of Murray's pieces, One Bright Morning. This is a piece he did in China, actually, Earth Household. Tiger moms and loving stones, they were like real crowd pleasers. Lots of children and families interacted with these pieces.
11 times.
That's a close-up. You can see Tiger Mom and the loving stones. And by artist Andy Zimmerman. It looks to me like it was always there on the plaza, and perhaps always should be. It was so beautifully sited.
That line is actually from Harris Barron, a shared experience builds community, who founded SIM at MassArt.
Did you want to say anything, Murray, before we start the discussion, or do you want to hold for the discussion? And Toni? Okay. And then our final panelist, I'm happy to announce, is Jean Kim. He is an architect at Shepley, Bulfinch, and the author of the art installation Sparkle and Chime for the Fenway Alliance's 2014 Opening Our Doors. His design was the winning entry from an internal competition at Shepley that was jurored by a prestigious group of design and community professionals, several of whom are on this panel. He has been a guest review critic at the BAC and Wentworth Institute of Technology. Jean was born in Seoul, Korea, and grew up in France, where he earned the architecture degree at the Paris La Villette. He also holds a Master's of Architecture from Georgia Tech in Atlanta and has been living in Boston for the past 10 years. So he's covered a lot of cultural and geographic ground, I'd say. So this is an image of Sparkle and Chime, and you'll see it in a larger scale. Basically, it took up a big part of Evansway Park. It was very hard to capture in photographs because it was very delicate to look at, but sturdy, survived the winds and rains. It was a beautiful, massive chime. Another image of Sparkle and Chime. We also programmed Sparkle and Chime, so you see a Tai Chi. This looked beautiful underneath the piece. There were a few other women that were doing this dance, and it looked really stunning. That's a night view of it. Another night shot. And then I just wanted to show everyone an image of a permanent that we hope will be soon in the Fenway by Jakub Kulin. And Marie Fukada is in the room. Can you just raise your hand? She has been instrumental in getting this piece to come to the Fenway, and we hope it will be here soon. It's a beautiful design, and we think it will really add to the Fenway as a permanent piece of art. So thanks, Marie. So I can remove myself from my perch now, and we can start the discussion part of the panel. And I just thought we'd open really with a basic question, because here at the Alliance, we kind of use, we want public art to be a real community building part of our community, and we also want to help it to identify who we are as a cultural district. And I was just wanting to ask pretty much all the panelists how they thought public art, and particularly temporary public art, could serve that purpose, or maybe it doesn't serve that purpose. And, why should it? What is, about identity building, placemaking, and community, and what is the role of public art? It's a very general question, but I just want to get people's kind of initial thoughts about that. And we'll turn on the lights.
Kelly, I guess I'll get started. I guess I would say that, the point about identity is probably the one I would think about most when I think about public art. And, might occasionally distinguish between art that happens to be in public spaces and art that is intended to be public. For example, like memorials or explicit monuments to things are often more intentionally public art, I would say, and are about, explicitly about trying to create some kind of comment on identity. Either we were all in this war together, or we all felt the loss of this thing, or something like this, or this is part of our, we may be all different people, but this is a common part of our heritage. It's probably, for that reason, differently important in a more diverse country like the United States than it is in some countries where there's already a lot of agreement about what the common cultural history is. I would say that's my opinion. And then the thing about temporary, just a quick point about the distinction between that and temporary. It seems like temporary public art has kind of a whole different set of opportunities to engage. And one of them is, I love this last piece. It's fantastic. I love that the sort of structure of it is not how you perceive it all. Is not how you perceive it at all. In other words, it's completely ephemeral in how you perceive it, even though you can tell that there's some logic to the netting of what it is. But I can tell it's
When you listen to Simon, they want to actually involve those that.
Oh, okay, so initially it was more taut, and then the weight of things, and it got wet maybe and stuff. Well, those are all the things that temporary public art can, it can age and have a finite life and exist for a particular season. All those things I think are interesting because they can be more about a particular place and time. Whereas maybe a more monumental thing is trying to be, in some ways, timeless. The cool thing about temporary is precisely that it can be, this is a really cool bit for the fall.
Right.
And it wouldn't work in the winter.
Janet, did you want to add anything to that?
I'm thoughtful about the fact that we've had a large conversation about what is this place, Fenway, and who is in this community. And as we move through the Fenway and define that, the community is defined in many different ways, and that's an important point for discussion as we create temporary art. And I'm also very interested in the risk taking that we can perceive.
Yeah, it's something that, along those same lines, that if it's identity that's specific to the Fenway Alliance, that I know for me, when we were kind of heading this, and also for, I'm hoping, for the rest of the panel here, that, Fenway is surrounded by all these museums that have this really strong art-based culture, but the kind of irony of it is that a lot of the people that live here aren't always going to museums. So the opportunity for creating this kind of temporary art almost brings the art to the people of the neighborhood and almost kind of creates this different outdoor museum. And I think it's a really cool parallel to these monolith, these huge, famous museums that we have around this, being able to have this type of art that is more for the neighborhood as opposed to towards and also when, George was talking about temporary, there's something about these pieces that it is indeed the temporariness that brings kind of this snap to it, is because suddenly something's there and then not there. It's that in itself has a huge effect. When something is there for a really long time, it starts to become absorbed into your daily reality and you lose sight of it. But these temporary pieces really, sure, people miss Sparkle and Chime when it's gone. And to be able to leave that effect on people is pretty powerful. But it can't happen as well as permanent art.
Did you want to add something, Ken?
Yeah, I saw just, it's funny about ENfold because I go out there at night to check on it because we were concerned when the microbursts would come through and when that it might, we just could never be 100% certain that it wasn't going to fall. It will tear or something, but there was a new energy. There were these circles of young people and of all ages in many cases. But there would be circles at night where people would sit, somebody would play the guitar. I saw hookahs out there. I mean, there was just this really, just this, it was almost like they found something and that they just wanted to, it was their, they took a certain ownership. Did you see a certain ownership happen?
They're not. I mean, I actually saw the crowds really emerge when this is a very quiet park by most standards of park, and the crowds kind of came when the pieces were up in a much bigger way.
Yeah, because during the construction process, we were out there at night. Or we were out there, in some cases, very, very late, and there was no. So I saw it happen as the piece, when the piece was complete.
I just wanted to say, I saw Sparkle and Chime walking back from the museum one night, and what was interesting about it is, it was just this ephemeral phenomenon that was happening in the trees. It wasn't like there was a plaque next to my field of vision that told me what I was looking at, or told me what to think about it. It was just really this funny thing. Maybe it was art. I mean, there's a lot of art institutions around, so it was a good guess. But I had no idea. But it was just this really special thing that was happening in the dark. And being able to bring that, again, because it's temporary, it's not like you're attaching this big signpost next to it. It just happened. It was just this really beautiful thing to make of it what you would, and it's really special.
Kelly, there is one suggestion. It's not too early in the conversation for a suggestion, but You know, I think things like temporary art are so much more powerful when they have a different kind of scale to them. And there's a scale to this park, but you can apprehend the whole thing at once. What would be really cool is if, and this would, I think this isn't a major cost issue, or certainly not a lethal thing, is to identify not one, but 5 or 6 spots, maybe throughout the Fens, but maybe even beyond that, and have thematically related interventions all around. That's the sort of thing that would affect, it's not something you're going to see. That is just something you would interact with throughout the city. I mean, this is a dumb example, but Chicago famously had I don't know how many cows all over the city. But whether you like that or not, you can't argue that you were aware of it when you were on the north side, when you were on the south side, when you were going to grocery shopping and so forth. The idea that you would interact with things that were thematically related is something you can't do in a museum. Even the MFA can't do that. You know what I mean?
Especially, well, for the elementals, the fact that that's so, something, it's just to make you more conscious of something that exists already, almost that kind of narrative that it lets you interact with the space in a way that you never did before, and you're more aware of it.
It could be seasonal, like, you know what I mean? Like, this just writes itself, by the way.
It's an invitation to play. I mean, we used to, the first night, we used to do parades and temporary works in the Boston Common, starting in the early 80s. And people are hungry to play. They're hungry when we would bring the parades down filled with, the same kind of interactive big things. You could feel the hunger for transcendence. You could feel the hunger in the people as you took that first night procession down Boylston. So these temporary things are an expansion of that. It's like a rock concert on the Common with, coming in like a parade that's off the rails.
We've asked ourselves, where is the incubator for innovation, and how do those communications happen between and amongst the artists, and this would create that kind of dialogue and that laboratory that is already existing, where the call for space is so serious in Boston.
Toni, I want you to comment, because you are explicitly about building community for your organization.
Yes, exactly. And the church is a founding member of the Fenway Alliance, and the Christian Science Church, to us, we feel, as it says in the Bible, that every good gift and every perfect gift is from God. And so we encourage the idea of architects and artists expressing that wonderful talent. And we happen to have, I believe, the largest open privately owned space in Boston. And so now we've had the opportunity twice to host large exhibits. The first one was in 1980, Anthony Hero. And it was done to help Boston celebrate its 350th anniversary. It's a beautiful exhibit. And then, of course, the most recent exhibit was this 2013 Convergence, which Murray can speak to more in the details as far as what the art was. But for the church, we certainly encourage family-friendly kind of art. I know there's all kinds of art out there, but we feel that most art really helps to uplift the atmosphere of thought and makes that kind of contribution to our community. So we can't help but support the idea of art and the ways that we can do that, and we can get into more detail about that later.
It kind of leads me to the next question that I think is a good one, because we talked about this when we were putting this panel together. Is it important for this kind of temporary art to either delight or provoke? Should its purpose, you talked a lot about it being family-friendly, should it be, or should it always be, or what are some of the intentional purposes of the art, and what are, we also talked about unintentional, like these little kids crawling around the beat. So I'd like the panelists to comment on should it provoke, should it delight, should it depends what it is. What do you know, what about that? And what about the intent of the artist when they do it? And then what really happened? I would just like to hear comments on that.
Can I make just one short comment about that? Because there's a little story. One of the pieces that came before us to approve or not to approve was something like the sword in the stone. But it had lots of things, swords and spears and that kind of thing. So we didn't go with that one. And that was the only one that came to us that was pretty questionable because the artists looked at their art before it even got to us to sort of, to determine amongst themselves whether they felt this was family friendly or not. And so most of the pieces that came to us for consideration were the kind of things that we felt was acceptable for families. But as we all know, different artists do have the more challenging, for whatever reasons, and I will speak to that as far as things that are maybe more provocative, that kind of thing. So I don't necessarily personally, see anything wrong with that kind of thing. I think it's up to the artist. But for us, on our plaza surrounding the church, it would have to be family friendly.
Okay, but this is interesting because, this is why we have to be clear about, let's say, as I like to put it, what problem it is we're trying to solve. If we are trying to create, let's say, an identity in the front yard of the Christian Science Church, that's one issue. And I understand precisely your point. And what you guys did was you said, well, we're going to have a lot of different artists. It's not really going to be part of it's going to be about the diversity of art. It's not going to be thematic. I think if there was a theme in the Christian Science stuff, I was unaware of it. They were all interesting. Some of them more interesting than others. None of them struck me as offensive, so you did your job. But of course, who knows if my offensive bar is set at the right level. I was an altar boy when I was like 12, but I haven't been back, so I've lost reference.
The problem with public art, Peter Sheldon at the New Yorker said, the proof of any work's lasting value is that it is born of a comprehensive emotional need, and it awakens in the viewer a corresponding need. So when you put that kind of personal piece into satisfying a public committee, it's like very difficult. So all the pieces that we put into Convergence were largely came out of our personal need in our own studios, and we're well behaved, as a group we monitor ourselves, so the work was largely came from a deep place, and so that made us happy. It seems to me the temporary thing is a default mechanism. We didn't do these so that we can have one more temporary work after the next, and I find myself trucking these one-ton sculptures now to 2-3 more permanent sites in the city of Boston. Like let's cut to the chase at some point, because the materials are permanent materials, they're durable. We build them for 1,000 years.
But that's a different thing than that. I mean, that's all I'm getting at is that we should be clear, he said, there's a panel about which comments are about which problems. One of them is curating a show in a gallery that happens to be outdoors and owned by the Christian Science Church, that's one. Another thing is a temporary set of exhibitions that's very much about this little corner of the Fenway. Like, how do we define community amongst these different institutions? We could be pretty mindful about that if we wanted to. We could try to articulate what they have in common and then try to represent, if we want to make experiences that sort of enhance that reading. But then the third scale that we've at least started to talk about is something beyond this little park that's maybe more Christo-like or something like that. That is something that engages the landscape at a larger scale. Well, that's interesting too, and that's one that interests me most.
I think one of the things that you've articulated, though, too, is that you've defined it as a design problem. It's a problem to solve, and a committee is going to come up first with a theme for these 5 years in Fenway or something like that.
Not artists.
So, so I think it can be different as an individual artist who's, they're not trying to solve a problem. I mean, maybe it is an individual problem that looking at and they're saying, I see a problem that's that that object is talking to this object in a public space, and they want to try to connect them somehow to activate the space differently. but they're not basically fulfilling an assignment that's being conceived by a public group or a committee or something like that.
I would say our panel today has a problem to solve, which is to be articulate about which of these things that we're talking about. That's
I mean, I know that you and I have had conversations about your feeling when you do a piece like Hydra, do a piece like ENfold, about what you wanted to bring to the community, or, yeah. How do you think about it? Just in your process.
I come from a participation point of view. So my thing is less about connecting to lots of different places, but more about connecting to lots of different people. And one thing, it's not so much as the people that come and see, but if people can be part of the construction process. So Hydra, which was shown second with all the little pieces, that took about maybe 20 people helping to assemble. We just took a disc. Those were made of something which looked like a donut, basically. And there were 4 different sizes. There were thousands of these little pieces of paper. They probably fit in a box about this big. And there were 4 different sizes, and we folded them very simply. And I had about 20, maybe more. People were dropping bags off at my apartment of the ones they folded, and then we assembled. And it was interesting because that piece brought over 20 people together in the construction process.
Designers or were they?
A lot of them were students, students at Fenway, and we had friends of students, and I had friends. There were some people, I think, from the Alliance. So there were some children in there. It just becomes kind of a thing that at the end of the day, when it's finished, everyone's proud because they got to participate. And I guess what becomes really complicated about that, and I've done these kind of things before in inter-office, we all want to have artistic license. We all want to take the thing in our own direction, right? It's really hard to get something that people can participate in, but at the end of the day, it can be woven together into one thing that looks good, sort of intentional. And that's a tricky thing to do, to strike that balance. And the design of Hydra allowed us to take parts and sort of combine them in different ways so that it was almost like a great analogy.
So did they each make the flowers, let's call them
flowers,
and then
yeah.
you composed them? Like, did you make the shape?
What had the design?
But there was, they were all, there were about 7 different combinations that could have been made. So, and because we used the hexagonal form, they could come together. So there was really no way
Right.
you know, people could just sort of play around as long as you had a hexagonal form. So yeah, I mean, there were some rules that had to be established from the very beginning, but the goal was to bring as many people as possible, so that there was that sense of participation and ownership.
And what about yours, Rachel? Because that had a lot of interaction. You know, the interaction is a big part of Interlace.
Yeah, I mean, I'm actually noticing these kind of similarities that all of us that were kind of on the architecture side had this similar component where we weren't this kind of lone artist in the studio making a piece that kind of can stand on its own and is beautiful and draws people. We kind of work as in our respective offices to get this thing done. And so because of that requirement, there are these kind of multifaceted community-based, like our community, and kind of bringing out the external community meeting that had to kind of go out and pick up a lot of space. It's almost like all of us kind of came at it and we were someone handles this and then it's put together after we kind of the whole that we did
There's something interesting to you in public art competition. There's a budget first, right? And so that budget actually drives the design. So if it's $5,000 or $300,000, the artist is going to come on. Well, I only need $10. They're going to spend the budget. And it's interesting to say, like, because this process was happening in an architecture firm, with multiple people, all of your projects, in some sense, they were made up of multiples. That there wasn't a lot of skill required to put them together. And they were all very similar in that sense. Lots of little pieces come together to make one pterodactyl-esque kind of thing we do in the world.
So it's just an interesting thing to think about. And it's also like you described your experience with the community coming together to make this into lawn raising. And that's what I thought, which is literally just a bunch of pieces that come together. Basically anybody can do it, really.
Is there, when, should there be some curation of temporary public art? How should it be done? Should it be a jury, a process? Is there times where it should not be a jury? I mean, honestly, how the Fenway Alliance has handled this, the internal competition of Shepley, where we got Sparkle and Chime out of it, was a great process, and I would do that process again. But the biggest part for us, I think, in curating it is picking the right people and then letting them do their thing and be creative. That's how we handle the problem. But other communities may want to do it differently. And I'd love to get the panelists' idea, because there's been some art sometimes in our community that I wouldn't consider the best, honestly. And if it's getting to be an easier atmosphere in Boston to do public art, which I think it is, which is a very positive thing, but how do we make sure there is a certain level of quality? Or do we, or is that not? I mean, that's important to me.
We are notorious for misbehaving as artists. It's true.
But you do beautiful work.
Well, but let's look at a couple of concrete examples. Right? So, and I get in trouble in my architecture job for being specific about things like this too, so if I get out alive. But Central Square, I live in Cambridge, most participatory environment. And Central Square was 10 years ago maybe, I would say, they maybe more. They redid Central Square and they built a 5 or 6 story building where once was a story retail. And then they proceeded to make meaningful public art. That was a capital letters. This is going to be meaningful and it is going to be diverse. And all the boxes were checked. And I don't think anybody would say, with the benefit of hindsight, that this was a successful enterprise. Millions of meetings were had, and in the architecture world, in the art world, we all know that maybe more participation is not always, only Michelangelo had more meetings. Was said by no one ever. So, but on the other hand, we live in a democracy. It's just for a democracy. We don't just get to say, the dictator has said that this is the good artist and he or she is going to do all the stuff. So it is a continuum. I think the nice thing is about temporary. I think you can pretty much get around this completely because it's not going to be there forever. So even if you loathe it, it's going to be gone in 2 months. So it's probably, you're not going to suffer.
In a democracy, it's very hard to have public art. I mean, we are oversold on our individuality in this country. I did 3 sculptures in China, and the mayor said the Duart sculpture goes there, and there was no question. They tore down a whole neighborhood. There wasn't, in Cambridge, the daycare center has to get into, 10 meetings. I did a park in Cambridge, and the administrator protected me from all the meetings, and there was some controversy about a piece of play equipment that had 20 meetings, and my sculptures, went in under the radar. I never went to any public meetings.
I didn't protect him from any of those meetings.
I think some of it has to do with the competition nature of it too. That the competition happens before, like the piece is designed during the competition, as opposed to choosing an artist, and then once the artist is chosen, the work can be sort of created afterwards. And I think that, again, that sort of 3 people, which is part of the Brown Fund, actually stipulates that there has to be a competition in the city of Boston for public art. So that you kind of, it's one way, and it works sometimes, but
I think that this is the point where outreach comes into, where outreach, and we could refer to the process that's going on in the Greenway right now for Janet Eckelman's, because everybody knows.
Wonderful project.
Wonderful project. Again. So I think that outreach and support either method. You choose the artist chooses the art. And again, we go back to the risk. But if we're going to open up experimentation, innovation, awareness, experimentation with materials, and get beyond the state, or the central, then I think outreach is going to be even more important, particularly as we master plan the city.
When you say outreach, meeting with community groups, or what do you mean?
Meeting most particularly with those who live with the art, and then you need to define that.
Which is a way of saying that really this is, even if we call it public art, it's a design, if it's permanent especially, it's a design problem. I mean, well, at least I will assert that, because let's say the place on the Greenway, and there are a lot of stakeholders, and on one hand, we want to give the artist the latitude to create their thing, but we probably want to create essentially what I would call performance criteria. And those are things that, as simple as this is the site, you can't go beyond these limits, to these are some things that happen in this location, at least at the moment, and it would be nice if what resulted enhanced, or certainly didn't make impossible those activities. You know what I mean? The more specifically you could articulate those things, I think a good artist could respond. I mean, they wouldn't only respond to that, but they could mix in. That's where I would say it becomes a design.
The city of Boston missed the 20th century in public sculpture. With a few exceptions, we entirely missed all of the energy that went into modern sculpture. You have to go to Cambridge and MIT where you can find the masters. So I'm hoping that this moment is, for the Greenway, for example, is a chance to energetically move the city of Boston forward, take the risks that the temporary works open the door to permanent work. So maybe all of the work that you have done have opened the door for Janet Eichelman's piece, which is like $2 million or something. It's going to be there 6 months. It's green, it's turquoise, it's a net that's above the city. I mean, it's amazing. But a lot of work, maybe this is prepared the way for that.
And that will even open the conversation, greater conversations around murals, because murals have been highly debated.
They come and they go.
You're on this panel. You're in charge of the 1,000-year end of the spectrum. So it's good to know that we've got it all covered.
What you look at the life of a city, and the old cities, there are places where there were vivid acts of the imagination put into permanent forms. Old cities in Europe, old cities in China, but the cities in the United States where, I mean, vivid acts of the imagination that tell you where you are, because you're lost in a city street of skyscrapers. Well, there's a Jim Dine, you must be on Park Avenue or whatever. You need that. It requires risk and an energetic approach to this.
That's an extremely important point as we move forward to brand the city and connect the city, that public art is way home, is the way that we find our way home and to adjust.
The Olympics would be a great chance for public art.
I feel like we get some disagreement on that. The question was, how did he get his art how was the art selection process in China?
Somebody came into my studio in Brookline, said, compete for this project. You just never give up in public art.
I want to, before we open, because you guys have been so nice and patient and great listeners, but I actually want to open it up to the participants for tonight for questions and comments and discussion. Before I do that, I'd like to just see, does anyone have any last comment on this particular issue before we open it up to our audience?
Well, one other point about how probably gave us things to think about before the conversation. One that I think is sort of at the other end of the spectrum from the Central Square example is, again, probably 10 years old, but I think they're about to revitalize it. And that's the incredibly, in my view, successful project of painting the undersides of the bridges coming in on the Mass Pike. Fantastic, good on so many levels. It's problem solving, they have to be painted anyway. It is serial, you understand it serially, in other words, you're on the Mass Pike for a while, and you appreciate this for a while. So engaging, it's not pretending that our job is to replicate art in Italian piazzas, at the center of an Italian piazza from 300 years ago only. I'm not against that, but it is not to suggest that that's the only way for public art. I like very much the modernity, unfortunately, it has been allowed to, it seems like it's so affordable, and yet even it has been allowed to lapse terribly, and they are just now repainting some of these things, if you know what I'm talking about. And it's an example, you make, one of your questions was, how do we get this work funded? And I would say, in the environment that I see moving forward, I don't see it suddenly, the American society becoming, hitting themselves on the forehead and saying, oh my gosh, why haven't we been spending millions on public art? They could, but I don't see any indication that's not to happen. So things like being creative about piggybacking cool ideas on top of things that have to get done anyway is a way to leverage our reach.
Well, I just look now to open it up to everyone who's in the audience with any questions or comments about this discussion or bringing up another point. If you want me to go back to a particular slide, I'm happy to do that too. Yeah, Marjorie.
I'm interested, Matthew, in what inspired you to do your public art into Mixed Plain.
Okay. So, I mean, to make a plain where I've done some of my work is also part of the Olmsted's famous and historic Emerald Necklace, and I didn't ask permission to install some pieces there. I see some folks who are close to Jamaica Pond in the neighborhood in the audience too. And I was actually very cognizant of that when I was making my work. But I think that my inspiration for my own work comes from being in public space and seeing opportunities where meaning might be conveyed through subtle alterations of objects. And so the bench is this Jamaica Pond bench is a piece that has been around for a while now. Originally not sanctioned, now is sanctioned by the city of Boston. They like it. And so I just think there's opportunities, and I have sort of not gone the route of the stacks of permits too. Although with that piece I did have to talk to the Boston Art Commission inevitably, who when I approached them said to me, "You're the first person who's ever come here alone." Another team of lawyers or structural engineers or whatever. I was the first artist to come alone and I actually asked permission, and I got permission. So anyway, that's ask forgiveness rather than
Yes, sir.
I've tried to sit in that bench. As a young person, I could. It's a fantastic piece of art, and I believe it's fitting in its location. But I would say that in my understanding of Olmsted, he would simply say to all of you who are contemplating putting something that's made by men and women, that the part is the art. The part is the art. And I think when we start to think about placing things made by humans, it takes away, at least from Olmsted's perspective, it is nature. And along with Olmsted, Walt Whitman, speaking very strongly about let's get back to the original concrete. Paradoxically speaking, nature. And I think everyone in the room would agree that humanity is losing its ability to enjoy the aesthetic beauty of nature. And I would only use one quote, and I could go on for a long time quoting Olmsted, but he said, the most important gift for anyone at any time Walking into a park is a sense of enhanced freedom.
I have to jump in real quick on. So that was really thoughtful, and I totally agree. And well, I think as long as you're coming at it from a place of respect. I mean, as architects, we build buildings all the time that people put chairs in, that people hang stuff on the walls. I mean, that's kind of the intent that, to me, when you make something, you leave it behind, that it needs to be able to evolve in kind of the new fabric that people are laying out, Almost it creates this beautiful thing, but, it does need to progress with its people. So I think there's something valuable if you're able to kind of shift someone's thought and change their perspective a little bit while being respectful, as Matt's doing, then I think it's a valuable addition.
Well, I don't think this needs to be extended too long, but we're talking about Olmsted making this park. It's a thing made by man, just like the Charles River, by the way. Written a fabulous book that came out 5 or 6 years ago, The Invention of the Charles River. I mean, not the discovery, the invention of the Charles River. We make things out of the landscape. People do. Olmsted did. We still do. And I agree with you. It is incumbent upon each generation to behave as responsibly and intelligently and creatively as we can. I would never agree with the assertion that whether it is on a utopian City Hall Plaza type setting or an Emerald Necklace, that there was a time when things were perfect, and any messing with them will only screw them up. We should close down the art and architecture schools if that's what we think. That's preposterous.
I'd like you to speak a little bit more about the selection process in terms of requesting artists to submit, and how you went about selecting the artists to submit.
That's a good question. With the Alliance, and it ties in with our funding challenges and how we actually get these beautiful pieces funded. For the ENfold, the ribbon piece, I met with him probably 3 years before the piece was actually designed and constructed, and we knew we wanted to do something together. I knew she was a talented designer, and I knew she would be the right person to work in this community, but there was no way I didn't have the resources. So him, in the meantime, flash forward 2 years, and she was working in a large architecture firm that did have some resources. So through our continued conversation, she then told me, look, I'm at a firm, it has a community component, I can now fund this, get this funded, and it sort of worked out beautifully that way. It took 3 years for that to work out. For that then gave me the idea of, I looked through my partners roster of the alliances, that we have many corporate partners in the alliance organization itself, many of whom are architecture firms, and I thought, oh, okay, here's a way we can get something done with limited resources. It's also a way to let young architects take a stab at some of these challenges and creating some. So then the next piece was Goody Clancy, Rachel and her team, really providing this for me as an in-kind donation as part of their partnership with the Alliance. And then the third piece was Jean's piece at Shepley with his team, and again, it was their contribution as a partner to the Fenway Alliance. But it limits, you can see the limitations. I'm working with all design architects. It's very hard to fund individual artists that way. So,
larger firms are likelier to do this.